Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend a few minutes with Foundation and Earth by Isaac Asimov. This book was originally published back in 1986. It is the fifth of the Foundation books, and I have read and chatted the previous four: Foundation, Foundation and Empire, Second Foundation, and Foundation's Edge, and I will link to those chats down in the details below, but this one is number 5. After this book was published, I believe there were a couple of prequels that were published, Prelude to Foundation and Forward to Foundation, and I do anticipate reading those this year. I believe there have been a few books published in the Foundation universe by other authors since Asimov's death in 1993, and I may get to those eventually, but I definitely wanted to read through the Asimov novels in the Foundation series. So what is this one about? First off, I want to talk about spoilers. This is, science fiction sort of adventure, so I don't want to give away anything that I think would detract from a first-time reader's experience with either the Foundation series in general or this particular book, Foundation and Earth, so I will be careful about that. Another thing I wanted to mention about this book is it's got a lot of interesting philosophical ideas in it, but that doesn't mean it was hard to read. It was actually a very fast and fun read, but it does contain some interesting philosophical concepts that I'm going to talk about more here in a bit. It was part of the fun of reading the book. This book basically picks up where the previous book, Foundation's Edge, left off. So we have three main characters: Treves, who's a councilman from the Foundation, the historian Pellerat, and then Bliss. Bliss is a woman we met in the previous book. She is from the planet Gaia. She and Pellerat have developed a relationship, and so she wants to travel on this quest that Pellerat and Treves are about to go on to find the mythical Earth. So, due to the events in the previous book, Treves has made an important choice for humanity. The decision he made in humanity actually points humanity's sort of evolution and future into a certain direction. And this direction is toward a sort of unified galaxy, a unified consciousness of the galaxy called Galaxia. This would be a noosphere of Galaxia. So the noosphere is a philosophical concept that I just think is so interesting. It evolves. A noosphere is the sort of an atmosphere above the atmosphere. It's a noosphere. It's composed of human minds, and it's sort of a planetary consciousness. And the concept of a noosphere was first published by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin back in the 1920s, although it seems that some other philosophers around the same time also were using the term, but he was the first one to publish that concept. And I have previously chatted a couple of books by Chardin, which really goes into this concept of the noosphere, and I think they're just so interesting. The phenomenology of man and the future of man, I have previously chatted, so I will link to those chats down in the details below if you're interested in that idea. The term noosphere actually does not appear anywhere in this book, but the idea of a noosphere does. Anyway, back to this book. The Gaia, the planet where our characters start out in this book, is an example of a planetary noosphere, as I mentioned. And Galaxia, this sort of a future evolution of humanity, would be a sort of a galactic noosphere. And Treves thinks that the key to finding out if he made the right decision or not rests with finding the origin of the humans, which is, mythologically speaking, Earth. So Pellerat, he decides to set out to try to find this mythical planet. Pellerat, the historian, has studied mythologies related to Earth for his entire academic career. And I mentioned Bliss, who wants to go along on this journey. She and Pellerat, as I also mentioned, have a relationship, but also she is Gaia. So Gaia is the planet that has a consciousness, right? So each individual on the planet has a consciousness, but it's also part of the planetary-wide consciousness. So the first planet that they go to is called Comparellan. And this planet claims to be the oldest inhabited planet in the galaxy. And in this world, the Foundation world, I mentioned this in other chats, there are no aliens. So the galaxy has been colonized by humans. Humans can be very different, but nevertheless, they're all human. So anyway, after Comparellan, they go to a planet called Aurora. And Aurora is a spacer planet. So spacer planets are the planets that are thought to be the first worlds where there was sort of a diaspora of humans, and they colonized these planets called spacer planets. So I don't want to talk too much about spacer planets or what happens on Aurora or any of the subsequent planets that they visit, because that is a huge part of the fun of reading this book for the first time, is sort of uncovering that story for yourself. So one thing here that the book makes really clear here, Foundation and Earth, this is really tied into the Robot series by Asimov, which I have not read. I'm familiar with it a bit, but I have not actually read it. But I won't explain how this ties into the Robot series because, again, spoilers, and it would give away some of the fun of uncovering this sort of journey to find the mythological Earth. But it is tied into the Robot series, and I'll just give you that little bit of nugget of a hint. So just some thoughts about the book. So in addition to the concept of the noosphere, I think it's also helpful to understand Gaia, to understand the concept or the philosophical concept of panpsychism. This idea is like there's a basic unit in the universe, which is consciousness. And everything has consciousness in this philosophical concept. Subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, cells, fish, plants, clouds, stars, dining room chairs, ping pong balls, and humans, and everything has consciousness. But the amount of sentience that an object has is dependent on its complexity. So humans, being complex, has a very high degree of sentience, whereas something like a subatomic particle would have a fairly minuscule amount of sentience. So I read a really fascinating book on this topic a while back, and I chatted it here on my channel. It's called Panpsychism in the West by David Skrbina, and I'll link to this chat down in the details below if you're interested in that concept. But I think that's helpful to understand Gaia, to have an idea of what panpsychism is and what the noosphere is. So I mentioned earlier the planet Gaia is an example of a planetary consciousness where everything is leaked, but that's not to say that they function the same way that individuals do. They are both an I and a we. So Bliss, the character in the book, is both an individual named Bliss who functions sort of independently with free will, but she's also the planet itself because she has an awareness of the planet itself, of everything, right? And so she's both an I and a we. And so another little side trip to take here is the Dante's Inferno, the Divine Comedy. I read this a while back and chatted it. And in the chat, there is this, Dante comes across this being in paradise called an I-we, which is both an individual and a sort of everything, right? So I think that's really interesting. I'll link to that chat in the details too if you're interested to hear about that. But back to Gaia. So through this interaction between Bliss and Pellerat, we kind of learn a bit about what it's like to live in this noosphere, this planetary noosphere of Gaia. One time he asked her, "You speak for the whole planet, do you? For the common consciousness of every dewdrop, of every pebble, of even the liquid central core of the planet?" "I do. And so can any portion of the planet to which the intensity of the common consciousness is great enough. So if you're a complex enough being that has the sentience, you can speak for everything because you would have that sort of sense of the whole. To me, this sort of sounds like, you know what it's like? Have you ever felt like you really belong to a community, like you're, or maybe like a sports fans or something, you're in some sort of group and you feel like, okay, these are my folks, these are, I belong here. But it's a feeling of like we're all connected somehow. To me, that's how Gaia would be like on a daily basis. Pellerat does say to Bliss, though, they're in this relationship, and in interacting with her, he comes to understand that he's impacting all of Gaia by his interactions with her. And he says, but it does give me a queer sense of responsibility. When I try to make you happy, I find that I must be trying to make every last organism on Gaia happy. Every last atom. But you do. You add to the sense of communal joy that I let you share briefly. I suppose that your contribution is too small to be easily measurable, but it is there, and knowing it is there should increase your joy, Bliss tells Pellerat. So she's saying that, yes, you're impacting the whole common consciousness, because what you contribute, for good or bad, actually impacts the greater whole. Finally, on the topic of Galaxia, there's a quote here I'll close with. It says, please listen to me with an open mind. If you have millions of interacting worlds in the galaxy, as is, of course, the actual case, and if each is made up entirely of isolates, as they are, then on each world, human beings are dominant and can force their will on non-human life forms, on the inanimate geological background, and even on each other. The galaxy is, then, a very primitive and fumbling and misfunctioning galaxia, the beginnings of a unit. Do you see what I mean? Yeah, I've enjoyed this whole series because it's so fun to read. Plus, it's got a lot of cool ideas like this in it. So I will read the prequels soon, but my next chat is actually going to switch gears into some fantasy, and I am going to chat about Game of Thrones. I have finished this already, the first book, Game of Thrones, and I will have a chat on this coming up soon. So until next time, take care. Bye.